My beginning interest in the profession of teaching dates back to a one-room school back on Rich Mountain in Randolph County. There I had a man teacher whom I did not recognize at the time as such, was an unusual teacher and greatly influenced my learning and behavior. For example, when he caught two of us boys smoking a cigarette on the playground during lunch period, instead of the usual flogging, he completely ignored it until 2 days later, when in a class in Cutter's Anatomy of Physiology and Hygiene, that should be in quotations, this text ended every chapter with a pointed emphasis on the evil effects of alcohol and tobacco on various organs of the body, and which was accompanied with charts showing a spotted livers and divers deformed organs from their usage. Thus he emphasized the dangers of smoking without any specific reference to the incident of the days before. In many respects, as I recall in my later days, his methods, personality, and understanding of youth influenced me and led me to want to be a teacher. A few years later, when I was old enough to leave the one-room school, note we did not graduate, since in all the years there I was never graded, nor had an 8th grade test, Father let me go over to Beverly to a summer normal school of 6 weeks, where we took a 6 weeks review of the common school branches in preparation for the state uniform examination for a teaching certificate. Incidentally, that was the first formal examination I had ever taken, and in which I earned a 2nd grade teacher certificate. Our teacher in this school had a real professional bearing. He was handsome, carefully dressed, and very circumspect in his attitude towards the students. He too led me to want to be a teacher. Along with my 3 years' experiences in teaching one-room schools, I got some understanding and even inspiration from the county institutes held each year, supervised by the State Department, and to which attendance was required by all county teachers. I remember one such in particular that we were introduced to some new methods, and from which I was inspired to go out to the country school with an urge to greater accomplishment. One of these newer methods was in the teaching of reading. We learned to introduce the child directly to words instead of the old ABC approach. That year I learned also that new methods brought contacts with parents. One father came to my school to ask why his son had not learned his ABCs. I made some explanation of the method, which I'm sure he did not understand. However, I compromised by promising that if Troy did not make progress in his reading in a few weeks, I would teach him his letters. I was helped largely by the unusual intelligence of the boy, who readily picked up his ability so that he was able to read in second McGuffey's reader before the end of the term. His father became my greatest booster in the community. I learned later through many experiences that the child with good intelligence will learn to read by almost any method, and good teachers seldom use one in isolation from other approaches. I must say that my education courses in college left little impression on theory and practice and teaching. I took the education courses because they were required for a teaching certificate. I recall one course in which we used Dewey's text, Education in a Democratic Society. I think I never mastered his philosophy at that time, and if my professor did, he did not help me any. From that experience, I can see why many students consider their education courses abstract and impracticable. I thought of that the years I was teaching such courses and gave much effort to avoid such influences on my students. My real understanding of the Dewey philosophy did not come until some years later as a student at Teachers College, Columbia, where his philosophy was the reigning influence of the day. In my master's studies at Columbia, I was involved with the then rising movement that got the name of progressive education. Dewey and his philosophy was in its heyday. I never came in personal contact with him, but my professors were largely disciples of his. But most of all, teachers and philosophers, I was influenced by Dr. William Herd Kilpatrick. His theories of what democracy is or should be, and his principles of applying them to teaching was most logical and inspirational. His text, Foundations of Method, became my handbook to the practice of teaching during much of my college years at Glenville State. At the same time, the psychology of William James was prominent in education, along with the specific reaction theory of Thorndike. This later was supplanted by the Gestalt theory. These theories, associated with Dewey and Kilpatrick's philosophies, largely shaped the progressive movement. I never joined the organization called Progressive Education, and with which my brother Robert was associated. He was at the time in the Monongahela County system and on the summer faculty of West Virginia University. While I never became a member, my views supported much of that movement's program. My later studies in teacher college education at George Peabody College, where the atmosphere was more conservative than that of Columbia. The philosophy and principles of the McMurray brothers were the popular views at that time. I had the course in methods to Dr. Charles and used his text, the problem approach to teaching. He would bring whole classes of pupils from the model school into the classroom and personally demonstrate his methods. Not only his method, but his enthusiasm for them and for all teaching influenced me greatly. A course in Teachers College Administration with Dr. Carpenter, and a Teachers College Philosophy to Dr. Donovan, and Methods of Reading to Dr. Donovan, who later became president of the University of Kentucky. All were valuable contributions to my preparation for college teaching. In speaking of the McMurray brothers, Charles and Frank, they were noted then as having had their background and training in Germany, where both of them received their advanced degrees in education and, of course, became proteges of the Herbartian method of teaching. We would remember that as the National Society for the Study of Education, and that was founded at the Normal, Illinois school, where the McMurray brothers made famous that method theories. I never spent a term in the university that I did not take courses in English and history of some type. Some of these were, I believe, at the time the best in the country. Some of the best known names, like Dr. Carl Van Doren, to whom I had a course in the study of Whitman, and to Dr. John Erskine in the materials of poetry. Also Dr. Abbott's course in compositions of poetry were outstanding. However, I think the most inspiring teacher of literature in all my educational experience was Dr. Edwin Mims of Vanderbilt, who taught a course in world literature at Peabody. So inspiring were his lectures that I would attend his Sunday school Bible class to hear him teach biblical literature. My first years at Glenville State, then the normal school, were disturbed with some problems that were unique in the school at that time. I had just come from Peabody, imbued with the spirit of teaching and teacher education. In fact, imbued with the description given some of us who had attended that institution by the well-known Dr. J.N. Deal, West Virginia University. who this influence in the development of teacher education in the state has been noted since that time. I found at Glenville a devotion to the classical arts and almost no emphasis on the courses in teacher education. The term education courses were held practically in mild contempt by some members of the faculty. The president had never taken any course in teaching or teacher education in all his college training. He was a fixed disciple of the classical arts, of language and mathematics. There were two of us in the Normal department, and we were barely able to get enough attention to the department to meet the certificate requirements. Soon after this, the state set up the requirement that made it necessary for the college to enlarge the curriculum and give more emphasis to the courses. Later, the State Department of Teacher Training instituted a movement to develop within the state colleges a uniform curriculum. I was named to the committee that carried on the studies out of which such a curriculum was set up. This did not come easily, as some of the state institutions objected to having the committee tell them what courses they should offer. My brother Robert Clark, who was then Director of Teacher Training in the State Department, directed these studies over a period of 3 years. From that first service on teacher training committees, I was a constant member of committees and groups studying teacher training and curriculum changes. I concluded my last 7 years at Glenville State as a charter member of the State Teacher Education Committee, appointed by the State Board of Education as a permanent body to make a constant study of teacher education and to make reports and recommendations to the board for guidance in this field. I believe that committee became the most significant and influential force in the history of education up to that time. My reactions to educational changes since my retirement are so mixed that I can hardly form a position on today's progress and status. I've always believed in change. We have to have change because it is as fixed as any law of human behavior. And so should education practices change. But not all changes are good. I've always believed in experimenting because we have to try out practices to support theories. My criticism of recent movements in teaching is that teachers in the field have never kept up with the theories and practices in the colleges. Our county system in Wood is a good example of this. In Wood County, since I have been living there, has instituted a number of changes in reading practices. They started out with the reading machine. Then they tried out the ITA method, known, I believe, as the initial teaching alphabet. Other devices brought in by the federal programs. And today, I think not one of them is in practice in Wood County. Likewise, in the field of mathematics, the famous Krusneri rods were used here and required in the early grades for 3 or 4 years, and now understand they're not being used at all. Thus are examples of methods and practices that seem to have run ahead of the preparation of teachers to put them in use. My greatest concern in teacher education has always been the apparent gap between college classes and actual experience of teaching in the field with boys and girls. I would urge the teachers in the colleges to keep in close touch with actual school situations to which they expect their students to go. That in the past was not carried out well. And in turn, of course, I would urge students to remember that practice without good theories can never be very sound, and therefore they ought to master the theories and the best theories of the day in the college classrooms, and then when they go out into the field through practice they learn to apply these theories to a better teacher and teaching situation in the state. I would also urge our teachers to read widely, know many things outside their profession, and to be alert to the movements in society today that must be taken into consideration if they're going to influence the learning and growth of children.
This has been an address by Mr. H.Y. Clark, which he entitled, "My Experiences in Learning to Teach and in the Teaching of Teachers." Mr. Clark is 85 years old. He is an eminent educator in the state of West Virginia and a distinguished professor of Glenville State College. Clark Hall has been named in his honor, and also the Student Education Association. It has been a distinct pleasure to have Mr. Clark with us today, September the 30th, 1975.